Well, actually, worse than doing nothing under some scenarios. CBO has said that the effect will be minimal either way, and either way is the key term here. 0.1% total reduction in inflation or a 0.1% increase in inflation. I'm betting on increase in the short term because this bill front loads a lot of new spending on climate and whatnot, and it backloads the deficit reduction. Barely 7% of the deficit reduction in this 10-year bill occurs over the first 4 years.
It is the Martha Zoller Show, and Shondell Summers here with me right now, and I am my second day back from my knee replacement surgery, so my timing's a little off, but I am in good shape. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm getting around pretty good. They've upped the physical therapy and the movement, so I'm hurting a little bit more, but that's normal. They love it. Physical therapists love it when you're in pain. To a point, to a point.
Right. They justifies their industry.
That's right. You're in pain. Anyway, so Pete Sepp is here with me from the National Taxpayers Union, and that was a little bit of audio from him right after the so-called Inflation Reduction Act was passed. But there's so much more on the now that we need to deal with financially. We heard what Nikki Haley had to say at the debate where she laid out, very elusively that there's fault on all sides on all these issues. So, Pete, how are you? Good to hear from you.
Well, doing well, Martha. I can certainly sympathize. I'm 4 weeks out from hip replacement, and that's exactly what physical therapy does to you.
That's good to know. Good to know. So, listen, what's on your mind today, Pete? Tell people about the National Taxpayers Union and then what our focus is right now.
We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan citizen group working for lower, fairer, simpler taxes, less wasteful government spending, accountability, and less interference from government in our economy at all levels. We've been around since 1969. We've had a lot of setbacks, of course, with things like the Inflation Reduction Act. On the other hand, we've been able to push certain things like the Fiscal Responsibility Act, some $2 trillion in good deficit reduction, not by raising taxes. We've won IRS reforms. We've got a long way to go, but bit by bit, taxpayers are taking back the government that they once owned.
It does seem like we have gotten to the place where we aren't talking as much about raising taxes. Yes, there's the usual voices out there that say people need to, quote, pay their fair share or whatever, but I think that there is a understanding almost that we take in enough money. The question is how we spend it. And I hear that on the Democrat side in a quiet way also. When I'll talk to them one-on-one, when I'll talk to them, we do have 2 Democratic senators now in Georgia, and so I've talked to them, and they will acknowledge that there is, enough money for a lot of things. It's how we spend the money. But we still aren't in the process to where we're really looking at this the way we should. Are you hopeful? I'm a little bit hopeful.
I am a little bit hopeful as well. We need to confront, of course, the big elephant in the room, the entitlement programs. There was very, very little discussion of that at the Republican candidates debate earlier this week. Only Mike Pence and maybe a couple of the other candidates piped up briefly about it. There seems to be an unwillingness in the GOP to at least confront that problem. They're going to have to take lead and do it in a bipartisan. People have got to start speaking up about that. I think they also have to start speaking up about other ways that government can burden the economy. One that I've been following for quite a number of years, and I've seen ramping up very recently, is antitrust activity. And people say, what in the world does that have to do with taxpayers? Well, when governments decide to prosecute companies for being too successful or too big, or they do it at the behest of other competitors rather than on behalf of consumers, we all end up losing. Those companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars on litigation, having to defend themselves from government charges. Their share prices drop, and so a lot of shareholders, including retirees, suffer. Economic activity slows because innovation slows. If you're under the government's gun, are you going to take the risk of developing a new product or service? Probably not. And there are studies that show increased antitrust enforcement from the DOJ and the Federal Trade Commission and the state attorneys general actually does depress that kind of economic activity and lead to problems for all of us. That's why we're concerned about all of these suits against so-called big tech and the powers that these government agencies are claiming, because first it's big tech, then it's everybody else who is in danger. I'm very concerned about that right now, especially FT Chair Lena Khan, who is no friend of taxpayers in any way, shape, or form.
You know, in the debate, the first question was about Oliver Anthony's song, Rich Men North of Richmond, which has really become an anthem for a lot of people in a very short period of time. But he talks about his taxpayer dollars and what they go for. And you guys have done some polling on taxpayer priorities that kind of goes hand in hand with some of this tech regulation. And what are we seeing when you talk to taxpayers about what their priorities are?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, and the results are pretty dramatic. We commissioned several polls from Fabrizio, a professional polling company, in 5 states, Texas, Louisiana, several others that have very active attorneys, Democrats and Republicans, taking part in these lawsuits against tech companies. And the results came through to show that the support among taxpayers for their resources going toward prosecuting tech companies is in the margin of error of the poll. We asked the question, what should the priority for an attorney general be in spending their budget and directing their human resources? By 40% of the respondents, and we're talking Republicans, Democrats, Independents, in each state, somewhere between 40 and 45% of the respondents said the obvious. How about you prosecute crimes like murder and kidnapping and human trafficking? Somewhere between 30 and 35%, depending on the state, said, how about you focus on genuine consumer fraud like price gouging, or he's portraying themselves as doing one thing and not providing their service? Going after tech companies had 2%, even 3% support at most. And again, that was the margin of error of the poll itself. This is not a priority among taxpayers, and yet the attorneys general on both sides of the political aisle keep doing this, most recently with this suit against Google, where a judge actually threw out 4 of the 7 contentions that the government was making against Google pre-trial. Now it's going to trial in mid-September. But as I mentioned earlier, most of the focus is on protecting the competitors with Google, not dealing with any kind of genuine consumer harm. And I think that's what antitrust has to get back to. Is a given company charging higher pricing people? Is it trying to invade people's privacy to corner a market? Those might be genuine concerns for antitrust. But saying that an outfit like Yelp or TripAdvisor is upset that their search results are not being prioritized enough by Google, and therefore this is a government case brought with taxpayer dollars, it's ridiculous.
So Pete Sepp from the National Taxpayers Union, if people want to know more about this, how can they find out?
They can visit us online at NTU, our initials for National Taxpayers Union, NTU.org.
Thanks for being with